Hi, everybody. Welcome. Glad you could make it today. We have a wonderful topic today on emergency fundraising during the COVID-19 crisis. And pretty much every day in our life as well as in yours, we're navigating all of the different things that we need to do, make decisions about, and consider during the crisis and how it has affected all of our schools in a variety of ways. And of course, the biggest one is children not being there. Next to that is the finances. And I see that many people are still logging on, but we'll get started. I'm joined today by Tim Seldin. As you can see, Tim's going to be our main presenter today. And also joined by Dr. Michael Dorr, who is often with us. Michael, thanks for being here, senior consultant with Montessori Foundation, and well-known author, international workshop leader, and teacher educator. So many titles I could go on and on, but I won't. I will turn it over to Tim so we can get started on this really important topic today. So thanks, Tim and Michael, for being with me today.
Thanks, everyone. And I definitely encourage you, feel free to ask questions. I'm only going to show a few slides. I really don't like death by PowerPoint, but I thought the topic deserved a quick review of the fundamentals of fundraising. Our topic today is emergency fundraising. Now, what that might mean for you is, one, you've been doing fundraising for years, and now you need to ramp it up and raise money beyond anything you ever imagined. Great example of that, by the way, if you want to look, is go to the Montessori Foundation Facebook page. You find some interviews that have been done by Michael Bourne of the Montessori School of Virgin Islands, where a couple of years ago he raised enough money to keep his school running after the 2 hurricanes hit. He then went on to raise another $5 million in reserve, which is enough to keep the school going for a couple of years. And he started with a modest fundraising program. It could be that your version of fundraising is in the $15,000 to $25,000 range, or it could be that you've really never done much. It's your parents' association's done a little bit here and there. I'm making an assumption that whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, publicly funded, charter school, or private, independent, faith-based, or whatever, large, small, probably fundraising on an emergency basis ought to be in your toolkit. I personally would not recommend, if you're in the United States, relying only on the CARES payroll protection plan, the PPP. I would definitely apply for that. I would not rely on a SBA EIDL loan, the emergency economic impact for coronavirus loan that you may have been reading and hearing about. Those are both good things. We highly recommend, whether you're for-profit or nonprofit, you seriously go ahead and do that. But fundraising is almost certainly going to have to be part of your bag of tricks, because we know a fair number of our parents are not going to be able to pay our bills or their bills. We know that our enrollment is likely to be considerably lower next year, and we really need to be sure that we have as much money as we can on a cash flow basis to keep going week by week by week, because if we can avoid it, the last thing in the world that we want to do is lay off teachers, lay off assistants, lay off office staff. Once a school starts to unravel, it's not that it cannot be rebuilt, it just takes years. And we care about people. That's why we're in this business. This is not a simple bottom line business, whether you're operating at for-profit or not. There are better ways to get rich than running a school. So I believe that schools are really about people. They're about children. They're about the teachers that work with the children, the support staff and the administration, and all the other people that work around the school. And it's about the families of the school. And so the idea that we can fundraise in a time when the economic floor has been pulled out from everybody may seem like an oxymoron. And yet I believe it can be done. It's going to be much harder than normal, but I think that we really need to do it. So with that basic premise, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction in case you don't know about fundraising. And for some of you, this could be old hat, but I promise no more than 5 minutes of this kind of stuff. I'm just going to run through some basic slides. Fundamentals of fundraising in Montessori schools. And I say in Montessori schools because in general, what causes some schools to be so incredibly successful in fundraising is they happen to be located in a very wealthy community. There is a strong tradition of philanthropy, of knowing that you send your kid to private school, there's so much that's done in tuition and so much is done in gifts. And some families are just used to the idea of giving beyond the norm under the right circumstance. What we want to talk about first is what's that circumstance and what does that have to do with our current situation? Okay, people give for a number of reasons. Some of them we might perceive of as positive, some of them we might think of as manipulative. One of them is they feel a deep sense of connection. They're part of a community and they want the school to survive and they want it to prosper. That sense of having a stake in the success of the school is vital. That's the ideal state of relationship. A second positive reason is they give because they feel a sense of ownership. And what that means is when they give, they're seeing it as an investment that's going to benefit someone they love, such as their child. Another is they give because they want to influence something. And that could be, shall we say, less than positive, but it's often very positive. It's just that they really think that your school ought to have a stronger phys ed program or a gymnasium or add Latin to the curriculum. And they'll offer a donation that's directed to something. A gift is a way of having influence, and that influence could be over the program of the school, the policies of the school. It could be they just want to have influence and reputation within the community in which your school is located. Another reason why people give to a nonprofit or really to anything is because of friendships. It's what their friends are doing. It's what, they're asked by someone to whom they cannot say no. Another reason why they give is they want to have recognition. And that could be in honor and memory of, or they would like to be admired and respected. Like if you're a new person in a town and you have the ability by getting involved in lots of boards and by being very active in community service, and if you have the ability to make substantial gifts, that's a great way to get invited to be much more respected and more involved in the community. Like it or not, that's just the facts of why people give in part. Another reason why they give is social conscience. They feel it's the right thing to do. It's a cause they believe in, whether it's save the world or save the whales or save the school. And then next, they give to say thanks. They just appreciate what you do. And those are usually the sources of the biggest and the most meaningful gifts quite often. This deep sense of gratitude to the charity. And contrary to the popular perception of daddy or mama warbucks who throws their weight around, people who give money often tend to be people who have strong values and deep beliefs. They're not simply throwing money around willy-nilly. They think of it in a very, very different way. They see the needs of the world as being huge. They see their resources being so small, and they give to things that they believe in, and they give not because it's expected of them. They give because they want to make a difference. That's really important. The idea of helping other people who weren't helped when they were young, of doing something they think is valuable. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just come back to you guys and
So,
hopefully.
yeah, I'd just like to remind everyone that I'll be monitoring the question box, and it's on your control panel about halfway down. And if you do have questions or comments or things you've tried in this area, please go ahead and put them in there. I already have one question in there. And Tim, I want to remind everybody that what you presented is fundraising in the best of times, right? The kind of investment we do over a course of a number of years, so that hopefully in a crisis, we have that, that culture of giving that's already been established. So for many schools, you know, that may not be where they are right now. If they do have that culture already and they have particular donors they can go back to, you know, that's one avenue. But we also want to address today those schools that maybe don't have that built up yet, and how do we have the courage to go to people and ask for their support, and I want to get into that a little bit as well. But right now we do have a question. This is looks like Sunit Grover. More than half of my parents have not paid the tuition due April 1st. Okay, this we're hearing every single day. So I really want to emphasize that. And my payroll is due in a week. I've totally lost sleep. We gave a small discount. Can I ask parents if they will let me use the money, the tuition money, for the payroll as a donation?
Well, I can't give you tax advice. You can certainly ask. The question is whether or not it's a donation or whether it's just a use of funds in advance. So that would be unearned income or using prepaid tuition. And you certainly can ask. Again, check with your accountant and just make sure. But you can. And you can also ask a lot of things. You can ask people to re-enroll. You can ask people to stop and think about what they're doing. That if they continue to not pay, then you have no choice but to close. And once you close, it will be too late. Now, they may say, well, I don't care. I'll find generic childcare somewhere else. But there's a good chance that if we don't navigate these times well, we're going to see almost every private, for-profit or nonprofit Montessori school either go out of existence or suffer tremendously and take years to come back. So the idea of being honest with your parents, it's generally called transparency, is probably a really good idea. And you want to personalize it. This is where the money goes. If you think that I'm somehow pocketing and buying Rolls Royces, you are sadly mistaken. These teachers are working harder than ever. I have to assume you're doing some kind of distance program. And your parents are basically saying, heck, you know, it's not whatever you're doing, it isn't the equivalent of what I signed up for, and I resent the idea of having to pay you. But if you stop paying those teachers, they're gone, they're lost, they're on unemployment. And that may be a choice that you make as a school. But before I would lay them off and turn them loose to unemployment, I would have a serious conversation with these parents, either by a Zoom meeting like we're having now. You could do an email, you could do a one-on-one phone call with each family. I've seen lots of ways that people do it. But you can basically say, pay what you can, because if you don't, this is what the consequences are. And I don't want that to happen to our school or to our teachers, because your kids need those teachers to reassure them and to support you more than ever right now.
There's a couple of follow-ups to that, Tim. One is that they're talking about the $200 credit. So they gave a credit to the parents, right? So they just want to, I'm guessing, ask if that can be used to help pay for teachers. I'm not quite sure how you would do that. And online learning is in full swing. So just to give that context, and I agree. I also want to say that when you're in that kind of a situation and you're talking about this month, we are in April, and you don't have the money to make payroll and you're losing sleep. And, you know, the first thing that we're recommending is that you go through your list your chart of accounts of every bill that's due. And you're saying, what can I ask forgiveness on? What can I defer to a later date? How can I negotiate those bills to buy me some time? And to, really look at delaying, deferring, or having things forgiven every single item in the chart of accounts that can be done. That's as well emergency fundraising.
Yeah, that's just another way of getting to the bottom line. The ability to survive is increase income, decrease costs, or sell more individual spaces. Those are the three variables in any business. And in this case, we're adding another variable on the increased income. And whether you get that income in the form of an outright tax deductible donation, or whether you get a transfer of stock from a point of view of let's say somebody who owns a stock portfolio. From their point of view, they bought it at one price, it went up to here, it's fallen back down to here, and if they were to sell it right now, they're going to have a big capital gain, and they're going to have to pay tax on that gain. Whereas if they give it to you, they get a tax write-off that may help them with their tax bill for the year, and it's fairly painless when it's something like a stock. So setting up a stock portfolio account for your school is a matter of a day or two. And it's something that we recommend that you have so that if someone ever wants to give you stock, you can accept it. When you accept it, once it's in your name, you can have the brokerage at the bank or whoever you use sell it for you, and then you have access to those assets at whatever the value is. Same thing if someone gives you a car. But the bottom line is whether you get parents to prepay next year's tuition or pay April's tuition or give you an outright gift, it's all leading to the same goal, which is getting the cash in the door so you can continue to pay your bills.
Let's talk a little bit, Tim, about the message, because I think that, one of the questions here is, if I tell the parents I don't have enough money for payroll, will that create panic? And I would say, yes, indeed, it will. I think that there's a way to message what our needs are and why the parents would want to donate and other community members might want to donate. That is not a panic. But we can say that we have, we're in an unparalleled crisis, right? No one has ever been through this. And so we have less revenue than expected and more expenses than expected, different expenses. We have teachers who are still working. There's a way to message this so that we are talking about an investment in the sustainability and future of our school, not bail me out because I'm desperate. Two very different messages. So Tim or Michael, can you weigh in on that as well?
It's really not in an area where I have a lot of expertise because I've always worked, not always, but the majority of my working life in public and charter institutions. The public schools historically may have a parent group or something like that that does usually fundraising for a particular point. Like Tim said, it might be to fulfill a wish list that teachers have put out, or it might be to enhance the PE program. That was your example, I think, Tim. But overall fundraising, the population in many public schools are not in that culture of philanthropy that you've just been speaking about. And that's unfortunate because they also need money to improve their programs. And at this moment, also for survival. So it's a very important thing, and I think that message hasn't been reached there. But I'll be talking about Montessori curriculum and training and various things like that with some expertise, but not this. So I'm all ears.
Well, that's fair enough, Michael. And I should add something to you all. I haven't said the magic word yet. Kathy mentioned it. That's the list. We have our own lab school. We're going through this in real time with the rest of you. We are not out there doing aggressive public fundraising at this moment from our parent body. what we're focused on with our current parents is convincing them to pay their tuition, convincing them to re-enroll, building up the emotional bank account so that they and their children are more enchanted with the school than ever. And that's not always possible. There are going to be parents that think that you've done them wrong or that life's done them wrong. But you can do things, and that's a topic for a different series of webcasts that I think we've been doing, which is how do you create continuing community when you're doing distance emergency crisis distance education. This is not normal homeschooling that we're doing. But being honest with parents, from my experience, is not going to backfire if you handle it correctly. Now, we've all been in lots of situations. You may be in a situation where you're going month to month. It may even be that you're in a situation where you're using next year's tuition to pay this year's tuition. That's not unknown in the Montessori or private school world. This would be a good example of where that'd be a problem. But explaining to people isn't hard, regardless of what the facts are behind the scene. We have families in our school, and by the way, I'm not talking about public schools at the moment, Michael. We have families in our school who are not able to pay. We have continuing expenses, otherwise known as the teachers, who make up the overwhelming majority of the cost of running this school. And our goal is to not have any of them take a pay cut or be laid off, because they're irreplaceable people. They're the heart and the soul of the school, just as your children are. Your continuing support to the best of your family's ability is vital. This is what the numbers are. We don't have anything to hide. This is what we thought we'd have. This is what we do have. This is the gap. And we're trying to figure out how to deal with that gap. And you can tell them, we've applied for the PPP loan if you have. You can tell them you've applied for an SBA loan, and then you show them, and this is what we believe is the shortfall that we need to make up through emergency fundraising. I would hope you're not thinking you're going to make it on emergency fundraising only. And what we just were talking about, getting parents to continue paying and getting parents to re-enroll, that's not fundraising. That's just getting them to continue to buy in. So let's talk about emergency fundraising, which goes on separately from everything else we've talked about, which is creation of community and getting people to feel that it's worth continuing to pay. But the transparency and the willingness to go out there and just tell the truth. There's nothing to be ashamed of that some of our families can't afford to pay, and that our teachers still need to eat, and that this school's irreplaceable. That's the question you always have to ask on a day-to-day basis. Who are you? What is it you contribute to the world as a school? And hopefully it's not a commodity, just childcare between 7 and 6. It's something very special, which is the unique personality of each classroom within your school, the relationship between those teachers and those children, those parents and each other and with the adults, and the school as a greater whole. And hopefully each class is really dancing in sync pretty much with the rest of the school. So we don't have a lot of different versions of school within one school. So the question is, who are you? Because that's the story. Figuring out who you are and how you are benefiting these people that you're talking to, whether you're talking to parents about why you don't want to simply treat us like a commodity, a daycare service, but rather as part of a community that took a long time to build up. And if it were not here, it would be millions of dollars to rebuild this thing in most cases. And it would take years. So getting across a message can be done carefully if you know how to do it. And it may be that you're going to need to attend the free course that we're starting next week. I don't even remember what day is it, on Mondays?
Mondays, yeah.
Mondays, What's our time?
I'll look it up.
I think it's 7 to 8:30 if I remember correctly, but we'll check.
Yep.
The bottom line is we're doing a series of 4, and that's not going to be enough for many people, but it will go way beyond what I'm covering today. The goal being to help you craft your message, develop your list. And that is separate from the issue of how do you hold parents connected to your school and convince them to continue to pay. Kathy, maybe you could take a moment and explain to people about the financial planning support group, which is really designed to provide that level of engagement.
Sure. There's several. We've had so many questions and so much need coming on. You know, how do we get through this crisis? How do we stay in business? How do we pay our teachers? How do we take care of each other? And so what we've done is create a financial support task force, and that task force had several meetings with big groups, and we assessed the needs and had an intake form. So now we have, I think we have somewhere between 12 and 15 small groups, about 10 schools, 8 to 10 schools in each group, with a mentor. And we're facilitating schools through the process of making some of these financial decisions. How can we message correctly to the parents? How can we continue to collect tuitions? How can we improve our cash flow in the short term? How can we eventually put into place some financial safeguards for the future? And a piece of it is this fundraising, although when we realize fundraising really has its own needs, that's when Tim and Dr. Val Weiss have decided to offer the 4-week series on that. But the finance support groups you can still get involved in if you're interested in these small groups with a mentor. And that's at our website, montessori.org, under news and announcements. If you click there, there's a way for you to apply for that. I will tell you that currently we have a waiting list. However, we are recruiting new mentors, and we have just an outpouring of support of Montessori leaders who have run schools, who have proven success in finance and in leading schools, who have, you know, really given of their time and their spirit and their energy and their expertise to lead these groups. So there's very, very highly qualified people across all of the Montessori organizations who have come together to support schools. So if you need that kind of support, please let us know, and we're happy to get you involved in that. We are still taking applications. I also have a couple of questions here, Tim. Kaori says, my school went out and told the parents to pay full tuition initially, telling them to keep the teachers they need that need the support. But then they changed it to 50% tuition after they received complaints from parents. Now the school is refunding the families who paid 100% after the initial contact. And I wish they used the courage to ask for donations from the families who could afford it. And this is, again, part of, I think, our messaging, but I'll let you go ahead, and then I have a few comments on that one as well.
Well, I think the first thing is, Kari, what the school that you're involved with made a really serious mistake, but it's made. We strongly recommend you do not discount tuition. That is, in my opinion, vital. That's a mindset. You're selling a service by the hour instead of being an institution that needs to be supported. Negotiating with families one-on-one about their unique situation is very different from an across-the-board slash of the fees if you're continuing to keep your teachers on the payroll. Your cost didn't go away. I wouldn't count on the Small Business Administration to save us. Maybe there'll be money, but we don't know that yet. And until it's in your hands, don't count it. But if it's happened, if you've already done it, please reflect on that lesson. And if you're ever a board member and you see something like this happening again, and it has happened in many a school for a lot of reasons, not a pandemic, but you don't want to slash tuition. You're not selling your service like a child care center by the day. But if that's what's been done, then what's happened is your income has fallen And now you've got a bigger differential between the reality of the money coming in and what you need to pay your bills. So you can either borrow if you can find a way to borrow, or you can fundraise, or you're going to have to slash your expenses, which generally means laying off teachers, putting them on unemployment. Not something I would want to do, but if you're up against the wall, you may have to do it. The problem is getting them to ever come back. So that's where the part that I've talked about that said being honest and transparent with your parents in a way and at a time that does not send them running around in scurries. The sky is falling, school's going to close. And that is always a risk. There will be people who will hear that and they're really not very savvy about economics. But if you take the time, and again, in our financial planning support groups and in the fundraising group that we're going to be starting next week, we'll try to help you craft your message. You may really want to call out all of the best advisors available in your community. You may have a community foundation. You may want to go to one of the Montessori Foundation support groups that are on Facebook. Just kick it around with other heads, but realize that many heads have panicked or their boards have panicked and they've slashed tuition in the thought that that will keep their parents loyal. And if you've done it, okay, but if you haven't done it, don't do it. Just cut deals with individual families and call it financial aid based on real need. The real thing we're talking about today, though, is emergency fundraising. This is meant to be a teaser for the 4-week course for those of you who really have the will to put in the time to look at it. And by the way, the 4 weeks is not enough. That's just as much as Val and I are able to give away for free during the emergency. But there are plenty of people offering training and resources, probably in your community, on how to fundraise. But generally speaking, you just have to crawl before you walk. And emergency fundraising, you have to go into full bore sprint. So let's talk in simple terms. How do you do it? Separate from the issue of convincing parents to pay their tuition and re-enroll. It's totally different. So now we're talking about people in this situation who are willing and able to make a donation to your school to help you to cover the gap, otherwise known as survive. The reason why you do it is because you don't have a choice. Either you do this, or you're going to have to start letting people go, or you're going to have to be insolvent and go out of business. So you've got nothing to lose, but there are ways of doing it that will get you slapped. And so the idea of doing it with grace and dignity and kindness, remembering that no one has to give any money to any charity. They only give if they want to. And so that means you've got to have a mindset of who are you going to ask, what are you going to say, and why should they give? So it all begins with 2 things. The first is the message, or the why. Who are you? What literally would happen in your community if your school doesn't survive this crisis? What does it do to benefit children? What are those families getting out? Now remember, your families probably are not the people you're going to fundraise with. You're just trying to get them to re-enroll and pay their tuition. So let's make sure we're clear about that. This is fundraising to different audiences in most cases. Now, knowing what you're going to say, whether you're talking to the community foundation in your city, or whether you're talking to a wealthy person you know, whoever it is, you need to have a message really well thought out. You don't need to have a fancy brochure. It helps to have a website, but the reality is if you have to, you don't wait until you have perfection to go out and ask, because in a catastrophe, you've just got to ask, and you've got to be prepared to be told no many times. Again, the secret is when you go out and ask, don't insult people. So if you think about it as dating, you're in a restaurant, you're in a bar, someone approaches you, they may think they're God's gift to the world and that you ought to be enchanted with them. That isn't the way it usually works. There is energy or there is not energy. Don't assume because someone has the ability to help that they want to help you. They may prefer to help the puppies that are starving in the winter. They may want to help the hospital. There's a lot of worthy causes out there. So the question is, why would they help you? So you got to have your message straight, whether you're talking to someone that's capable of $1 million gift or $100 gift or a $50 gift. What's your message? Get it written out. You don't want to sit there and read it. You want it memorized in your head, but it's not a long ask. It's an elevator speech. And it's the way of the ask is a different conversation. I just want to say your first job is figure out, why should anyone give to you? What's your message? What's your story? Second thing is the list. Who are the people that you know in your life, not parents of your school? It could be the spouses of your teachers. It could be a teacher. It could be someone in your administrative team. It could be a past parent. It could be a present parent. It could be someone you just know from the community. Who do you know anywheres in the world who is capable of giving you a gift of $100 or more just because you asked? Quick story. I have a friend by the name of Chris Gallagher. Chris Gallagher was very involved with our lab school for many, many years as a parent, a board member, and then for a number of years as the head of school. When Chris Gallagher got involved with a new cause a few years ago, women's history in sports, and he was creating this museum, he asked me if I would be a donor. I couldn't say no to Chris Gallagher. I couldn't care less about any sports. That is not something I care about. It was Chris that got me to give. Ask yourself, do you know anybody in the world who would give money to you? And then expand the circle beyond you. Although my wife, Joyce, would tell you the first year she ever did this for a living, she had to call 500 families one by one and make the calls. And, you know, if you could, you'd be seeing the best thing is sit down in their home or over coffee, but we're not doing that. So the best, you know, the most impersonal thing is an email or text. The best thing is a crafted email that really feels personal. The next best is a telephone call. Better than that would be a Zoom call, but don't waste their time. Think of themselves as somebody who is single, who is getting hit on all the time because they're really attractive. And they're sick and tired of everyone assuming that they need to give attention to everybody who approaches them, a celebrity. People that have resources or are philanthropically generous, whether they have a lot of money or little money, generally speaking, are approached because people know they're approachable. They've been involved with other causes before. Make your list of who do you know who could give you personally or someone you get engaged in a bigger circle around you $100 or more. Then ask yourself, what's the amount of money I need to raise? In our case, for our lab school, we're saying $500,000 would be our goal. Ask yourself, how many $100 gifts would that take you? And then ask, who do I know that could give 100? Who do I know that might be willing to do 100 a month? Who do I know that would give 50? Who do I know that might give 1,000? Do we know anyone who would give 5,000? On a one-time emergency, this is it. This is the crisis. We're not coming back to you next week again. And that's what crisis fundraising is. It's a one-time ask to save the school. And you do it because it's literally, it is life or death. And if you don't believe that's the case, then you probably this is not a terribly useful workshop for you. But again, I started with the idea that for most of us, emergency fundraising on some level or another, convincing parents to re-enroll, to convincing parents to advance next year's tuition. And you're going to get told no on that again and again and again. But if you keep working it correctly, you'll start to gather a group that supports you. It's the same idea in fundraising. The difference is in tuition, they're getting a service. It's not an outright gift. So first, the message, the why. The second is the list of who could you ask. The third is the way you ask. And the way you ask is going to be different for each person to some extent. Because if I know that Michael Dorr is capable of making, he's not, but you know, he took a vow of poverty as a teacher, but let's say $1,000. I don't want to approach Michael and ask him for $100 if I think Michael is actually someone whose ouch level with me would be $1,000. And so the idea is don't leave money on the table. Don't insult somebody by asking them for so much that they think like, you really don't even know who I am. I haven't got that kind of money. On the other hand, don't be surprised if the people on your list, when you do a little research, have a lot more resources than you think they do. There's a book called The Millionaire Next Door. And in almost every one of our schools, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 parents who are appreciative and have the capacity to give. But I'm not suggesting it's going to be a parent in our school. That's just dumb luck. I'm suggesting that in our lives, there are typically people who, if they wanted to, could help. And I've given you the message, because they have the ability doesn't mean that they're going to. They're going to if they're motivated to. And you can't make that motivation. All you can do is ask. You're going to get told no a lot of times, but you do need to go back to the concept of why do people give, which is either to be a big shot or out of gratitude or because they feel it serves their own needs or just because they want to do something to help the community. Because if your school fails, something is truly lost that's precious. I'll stop there and take more questions. Good
Yeah,
luck.
thanks, Tim. People are saying they like your analogy, your dating analogy. I think you're famous for that. And that this is exactly what they needed to hear. We also have Emma Radigan. Emma is in Scotland. Thanks, Emma. We haven't seen you for a while, so it's really good to hear from you. She says that the UK government is paying 80% of staff salaries. So that really helps them be able to close down and, you know, buy some time, so to speak, and start looking at moving forward. There's a lot more there, but we have quite a few comments here. Kate, hi Kate. Kate Winters over in, she's at Sungrove in Florida. She says our wording was that we had to continue to collect tuition, but that we would use our expansion fund to help during this time. We stated that anything paid over 50% would be put back into our renovation building fund, and we have at least 30% paying in full. I will, you know, I really want to say that we have schools that are getting 70 to 100% people paying in full. So I want everybody to stop and think for a moment what you can do to message to your families that you are offering a service that is worthy of keeping the school in business and being sustainable in the long term. So people pay for what they value. And do they value your community? Do they value that you're staying engaged with them? Do they value that familiar faces are there for their children? Do they value that your school will still be there in the fall when we hopefully all will return to, you know, school days? So we have to put, our message has to be on what the value of what we're offering is. So I I really invite you to stop and think, or to talk to your boards about valuing who we are and what we offer. Tim's talking about the message. First, who are we? But also, how do we place a value on that so that people will want to invest, whether it's through fundraising and donations or through continuing to pay tuition. So I just can't emphasize that enough, that we have to value what we're offering. And several people in our comments, Tim, are saying, well, we're not offering childcare, and that's really what the families see us as. So that's an opportunity to redefine who we are in the lives of these families, who we are in the lives of the children.
That's a parent education opportunity, and it's not uncommon for Montessori schools to get sucked into that.
Mm-hmm.
It is really, really important, if nothing else, that you figure a way of changing that perception in your mind, in your staff's mind, and in the parents' minds. And that has nothing to do with whether or not you are family friendly, as I call it. In other words, the fact that you're open early and close late and have care on days when most schools are closed does not make you a daycare center. It may be meeting daycare needs, but that's not who you are. By definition, a daycare center doesn't just provide care. It uses the lowest paid staff it can, except for one educational coordinator for the site, and it is providing some level of educational program, occasionally really brilliant, but generally speaking, their primary goal is to keep their hourly costs of employees down as low as they can, because the goal is to provide a commodity. It's all about price and location. Whereas a school is something that may include that, but is much, much more. And getting them focused on the unique social, emotional, psychological, intellectual independence, development of executive function skills, however you want to define your unique contribution of what makes Montessori wonderful and your individual school wonderful. That's the primary proposition for recruitment, for re-enrollment, and for responding to the crisis that we're in right now. And yeah, your parents may not want to hear it. So don't be surprised if you don't offer the opportunity for them to hear your sermon and they don't show up, which means you may need to have one phone call after the other, and you may need to tame frightened deer, because at the moment, these parents are often in grief, in shock, in anger. I mean, they're upset with the world. And if you've all of a sudden put them at home with their children, whether your governor ordered it or not, they're not happy with you. And they're not thinking about your well-being and your teacher's well-being. The good news is they probably do care about the teachers more than you. The head of school is typically sort of the person they resent because you symbolize the institution that requires money, or you're the administration of the public school system. They usually identify with the teachers as, you know, that's normal. But you do want them to begin to understand that what makes the teachers possible is the organization, the institution, that the school is bigger than you. It's bigger than your class, your teacher. It's something that has been here for decades, or however long your school has been, and it's something that has the ability to affect the community you live in for decades and decades and decades to come. That's the core message, whether it's re-enrollment or fundraising you're talking about.
So Tim, let's see, I have a couple of questions. Larry Shanker, hi Larry, thanks for being here. We got to get you on a panel one of these days, not just in the audience. Larry says, do you think it's helpful for design who we are not as part of the conversation, or is that too negative? For example, we are not a pay by the month organization, even though we allow people to do that. You have pretty strong feelings on that. I think that people pay for a school year, And if we extend them credit, that's out of the goodness of our hearts and some, operational cash flow. But it really has nothing to do with what the fee for the school year is. But that's a message that is taught to your parents over time. And so, that's my thought. Tim, go ahead on your thought on that.
Yeah, and emergency fundraising, emergency community building. Larry, if in your situation, or if any of your situations, if you feel like your parents have the idea that they pay on a week by week or month by month basis, and if you stop providing service that they're off the hook, fundamentally, you need to help them understand the concept of why when you enroll in a school, unlike a daycare center, which is a month-by-month transaction. That's the definition. They're not cohorts of children that are enduring for 3 years. They're ever-changing revolving door in many cases. Now, I'm being unfair to childcare centers. There obviously are plenty that have a much more stable population. But in general, the idea of that industry is provide the most that you can for the lowest price. Whereas in Montessori, whether or not you're charging the lowest price, your cost of creating that program is much, much higher. So if you need to tell your parents, look, just like you can't go to a house and rent it by the month and not think that someone's going to jack your price for the month up by 400 to 800%, because in 1 month, they're not going to cover, they can't guarantee that their cost of running the house will be covered for the year. When you're approaching a school, whether it's a public school, which has its own rules, so charter schools, there it's on a certain day of attendance. Who's enrolled on that day of attendance? There may be other rules state by state that if your number changes midpoint in the year, your per student revenues may go down. But in the case of a private school, you're enrolling for a full year in advance. And it's in advance because you have to make your contracts with the teachers, whether they're oral, whether they're formal, whether they're pretty informal letters of understanding. The bottom line is teachers don't want to work week by week either. They want to know in advance, I've got a job. They've got a relationship with these kids that will hopefully last for years. They're connected to your school, hopefully as part of their personal identity. And while they may move to another school to follow a spouse or because they get an offer they can't refuse, you really want the relationship to not be like a one-night stand, to use my dating metaphor. It's a serious relationship. And what people are doing, and hopefully your contract says this, and your admissions communication when you're talking with parents, is if you do want to come, you're enrolling for a full year, and you cannot be replaced once that year begins. I know some of you have trial periods, probation periods, where either the family or you can get out. If you do, you do. I don't recommend that. The bottom line is, unless you've got kids in the wing and you're just going to pull in kids willy-nilly, if someone leaves, you've got a new one standing in line, your costs are for a full school year. And that's what you're asking parents to do. And if you're in the middle of a situation like you described, Larry, where parents are saying, why should I pay for April? You're not in session. The answer would be because the school needs to continue. And it continues based on whether or not you're able to and choose to pay, and that we're able to keep the costs in line. And again, the messaging has to be much more delicate than I just gave it, but that's just the facts.
Yeah, and I don't think Larry was necessarily implying that but he wanted to make sure he defined we're not that. And I think that you articulated exactly what we want to be able to let parents know, that there are other institutions, daycare, childcare facilities, that operate under a very different model than most Montessori schools. So Tim, a lot of these questions are still at this point having to do, I think, with things like summer camp, re-enrollment, and I would like to defer those to perhaps next week, that we get into a discussion. I've tried to keep these April webcast topics very relevant to what we're doing, so I've asked our regular presenters to defer right now for these things that I think are more top of mind and really crisis related. So I think I might invite some of our contingency scenario planning folks on for next week and start looking at what do we do if we can't have a summer camp? What if the families don't re-enroll and we're on pins and needles till August, wondering who's coming back and who's not? So a lot of these questions, I think, we can't really address here, and I really just want to acknowledge that we understand that you have a lot of questions. Fundraising is one piece of it, and we wanted to make sure that you understood that as an option, as a real option, and that I can highly recommend having, signing up for, or I guess they pre-register, right? And I did put the link in the box, in the question box, so hopefully you've all seen that. There's a link to all of our upcoming events, meetings, things like that, and the fundraising 4 sessions will start next Monday, April 13th. So there's still time to get registered for that. And I can't say enough about the expertise that both Tim and Dr. Val Weiss will bring to this conversation. And you'll be able to get a lot more in depth at that point.
Yes, this is meant to be only a first quick overview of the topic, because there's a lot to writing the messages or developing the script and thinking about who are the people and how much money do you need. But by the way, developing the amount, the difference between what you need and what you've got, a reasonable assumption is, one, if everything works great, the SBA comes through, how much do you really think you're going to get from that? Mm-hmm. And the SBA loan, you don't really know how much that's going to be. So really all you can do is ask, well, what do I think I can get out of my parents who continue to pay or pay a reduced tuition or prepay next year? And on a week by week, month by month basis, you're going to see that there is a delta, a difference between what you think you're going to get and what you think you're going to need. And that includes summer camp and other income that would normally come in during the months of June, July, August. So you have to, I think, base it on worst case scenario and just try to get as much money. If you don't need that much, that's great.
Yeah, so Monday, people are asking the question, the Monday workshop, I did look that up, and sorry to say, that is at 2 p.m. Tim, is that accurate? It's on the shared calendar as 2 p.m. on Monday, but you do have to pre-register at the link on Montessori.org under news and announcements, and I did put that in the question box. So keep that in mind. There's many other meetings and or groups you can join that are listed in there as well. So many resources for parents, for teachers, school leaders, finance, and other. Our contingency task force, we do have 7 task forces working right now, pretty much nonstop on trying to listen to your needs, assess those needs, and get you some information, resources, and opportunities to connect with each other. So do check at the Montessori.org news. And I will schedule, I've had several people say, yes, please get the task force on the panel next week. They started out as the contingency task force. They have morphed into what is called adaptive leadership, because we're all kind of searching and looking at how do we adapt to the new reality and make decisions for the future based on uncertainties. So I will invite them for next week. And
I
sign
see
up.
A number of people who are asking about, please send information about the financial planning groups. You really need to do that yourself. Go to Montessori.org, click on urgent news and announcements, look for the financial planning. You're going to see a lot of different programs on that page, because
Yeah.
there's a lot of different work going on by our staff and by hundreds of volunteers.
Mhm.
There's lots of support available for you, but pick the thing you're interested in, click on the link, do what it says to do. These are all free resources at this point. Normally, everything we do would be paid courses and paid individual school consulting and all sorts of work that we do as the Montessori Foundation and as individuals. Right now, we're just flat out doing everything we can to help you and to help your parents in every way we can.
Yeah, absolutely. So check that out, and I did put the link in the question box, so it should be there for you. But it's fairly easy to remember with Montessori.org. So Tim and Michael, thanks for being here today, and thanks to all of our participants for signing on at a very busy time. Keep checking back. We keep scheduling more things, more topics in response to the questions you're asking us. So we'll be here. We're here to help. We'll continue to be here to help. And we look forward to seeing you again next week or on another meeting before then. We have a Montessori Town Hall on Friday that's open to all at 3 p.m. To kind of just really brainstorm some of these things that we're all experiencing. No formal presentation, but a support opportunity for us to start planning together.
Kathy, if I can add one thing, I see a lot of questions that are really covered already in recorded videos.
Yeah.
If you go to the Montessori Foundation's Facebook page, or if you search YouTube for the Montessori Foundation, you're going to find a bunch of videos. Now, some of them are really long, 2-hour-long meetings, dozens of them. But you'll also find some that were done by my son Mark. For example, he's got one on financial implications, where I think it's only 30 minutes. And he really zeroes in on a lot of these questions I see asked, like, should we refund, aftercare and so forth. We don't have
Right.
time to cover all those, but a lot of this stuff has been addressed already, and you can get answers without waiting. But you can also ask it on Friday.
Yes,
next
you can
week.
come on Friday. Yep, with your questions Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. So please feel free to come with your questions, and we will address them. And we are going to be scheduling. I know some of the finance groups have office hours. So that's another way to get your questions answered if you decide to join that. And we'll be adding an hour or so a week that will be mentors just answering questions, just helping to process some of this, because it's almost impossible to keep up with the individual questions. So if you think of any other ways we can serve you, please feel free to email us, Kathy Leach at Montessori.org or Tim Seldin at Montessori.org, and we are happy to get you with the right resources. So thanks for coming today.
Hi, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.